Again in studio, this time about different forms of the code, but also the logos together with the code. To understand different forms of the server, it's not easy, but also it's not easy to understand image that represent one part of your simple brand. To understand simple, safe forums, but also the program of microends not easy. To understand all forums, but also different forms of dynamic ads, it's not very easy thing. There are many extensions when it comes to the server. Some people think that servers are somehow like computers, but that's not exactly correct. Many problems in server if you are going to work with server to understand different forms but also the content together with map might be extremely complex in this world. That's why fiction together with map sometimes it's important for health. Some people even code the heading but also legs together with programs, which is not ethical. To understand ethics, it's the most important if you are going to build a brand. Of course, in microants, we also had some sort of picture hub. In that picture hub, there were always very different forms, also the forms of animals in history. To understand millions of designs made in microends hubs, it's not easy. Also to remind myself that all those methods are actually not important if you do not understand the ethics. The configurations, but also ethics are very important and not too much apps. Nothing wrong if you build app or app for medicine or app for better sport or app so people can check themselves better what they are actually doing in sport or their health rate or heart rate. But if you are going to think about more and more ethics or even more health, you should sometimes forget on servers and also forget on the code. A lot of time, me remind our groups and teams that it is very important to stay ethical, but also to build proper configurations if you are going to build some sort of code or any type of site or program. To understand our history in programming, it's not easy, but also related to some simple forums in NASA. Of course, those methods were not important, but also were abused from the internet. And that's exactly why in our groups we decided to build the best security in the world, which actually means more and more ethics and not more and more wars or sound. Sometimes those servers from California will build you sounding which is not appropriate. The ethics in microends do not include any sounds. To understand our directory of code, but also structure, might be very complicated because we are building some sort of coding, very difficult index of chaos. Because the coding is not the most important. For us, the clients are important, but also the ethics. So everyone will have life. Not like other micro unappropriate forums, but to build microends together with code and ethics. The history is extremely complex, and the internet was not in the right forum, also not prepared for what we did think about everything or also about the open web. That's why our configuration, because the internet do not understand microethics, it's very, very limited. The limited forums include those hubs with millions of pictures of animals, but also some code. There are also the server-side scriptings, which are extremely, extremely difficult, but also used in ethical web development, if there even are ethics in the web. To understand different forms of the static web, it's not easy together with your site. Any type of number in microends might be some sort of partly code, but also based on history. But it's very, very difficult to think about any form of the coding in history next to the chips. The chips and circuits were simple, but the internet parts were extremely, extremely difficult. Also to remind myself that internet, it's not what it looked like, and it's going to be very, very difficult for any company to build ethical interface or to build ethical dimensions on the web. Not easy to understand all those thousands of logos of microends, but also other logos that come together to understand commonly used manners in code, but also different forms of computers. It's not easy. Sometimes the server side is very, very difficult to understand different forms of the hub. It's not easy, but there are also ASP, different forms of the ethical internet. If we think about ethical internet, it is not easy to understand this framework. There is also the pyramid, which is some sort of open source in framework. But in history, it looks that together with the internet, there was also sound, which we did not like. To understand that web is going to provide some sort of extreme sound, you should actually think about web as a poison. Sometimes different forms of the code are very, very difficult, but on the web, it might become very, very difficult to understand different forms of the frameworks. To compete with all those internet developers, it's a nonsense. That's why sometimes returning to self, but also to build some solid JavaScript or Java, or build some simple app or program, and not too much forms of the web. Whatever it looks on web, based on our history, we know that any form of the internet might be extreme illusions. All those mappings made with different forms of coding might be extreme, extreme nonsense. To build a better language in coding, it's not easy. To build ethics, it's not easy. Not to go fast on that web solutions, because those are in 98% not solutions at all. To build some healthy code or very good tools might be very, very important part also in our history and circuits, and not the internet. The internet usually it's extremely confused, but also extremely, extremely strange, because there is so much projects on the internet. To understand different forms of the web applications are not easy, and of course there are different forms of static websites. There is the server side, but also the client side. Of course, there are also many, many forums and different forums to discuss the code of microends, but you should actually look for template in microends. If you are going to look on the internet for different picture, you should actually also think that internet might be extremely, extremely unimportant for us. But still, we might build some simple web service or simple application for the framework. The application security should be under configuration of our directors, but not too much complex. to understand different forms of web applications, sometimes you should also look for the basic 5 on the web. And those are actually quite corrupted, especially if you are coding and not understanding them fully. To understand different forms of web applications, it's complex. But if you ask me for a what is perfect on the web, nothing is perfect on the web. You should actually look for build simple app or simple program without web and then representing it on the web. Of course, there is also science, which is extremely difficult, but the science, it's not related to the internet. All the people that are looking for science or microscience, that's not part of the internet. The internet might include millions of trouble and millions of poisons we are not part of. To understand different forms of the code should not be part of the internet. If anything is shared on the web or any type of logo or other logo together with microends, you should also think about ethics. Are there any ethics to build or to be considered wrong? Should there be no voice in any brand in this world on the internet? Because the voice on the internet might be extreme poison. It is very important not to trust all the service, but actually only look for the things that you actually need. So if you are going to look for our type of science, it is not going to be on the web. You are only going to find the picture products, but also the picture products about programs.